Islam Makhachev didn't just win, he put on an absolute clinic that's completely rewriting his story. So how did a fighter who's known almost entirely for his grappling just totally dismantle a dangerous striker? Well, that's what we're going to break down. The anatomy of this historic victory, from that suffocating ground game to the surprisingly slick striking that tied it all together.
First, let's just put this win into perspective, okay? We're talking about 16 straight victories. With this win, Makhachev just tied the legendary Anderson Silva for the longest win streak in UFC history. That's just insane territory.
And, beyond that incredible streak, he joined an even more exclusive club. As MMA Fighting points out, he's now a two-division champion at the same time, holding both the lightweight and welterweight belts. I mean, only a handful of fighters in the history of the sport have ever pulled that off. Which brings us to the big question. Look, tying records and grabbing belts is one thing, but it's the way he did it that has everybody talking. So how in the world did he execute such a flawless performance against a certified killer like Jack Della Maddalena? All right, let's dive in.
It really all starts with his foundation, right? The thing that got him here in the first place. His absolutely suffocating ground game. This was the engine behind his dominance in this fight.
And his plan on the ground was just brutally simple and effective. It was basically a three-step process. First, get the takedown. Second, establish that crushing top control. And third, just drain every ounce of energy from your opponent, round after grueling round.
And honestly, this quote from MMA Fighting just captures it perfectly. He didn't just control his opponent, he suffocated him. By spending almost the entire fight on top, he gave Della Maddalena zero room to breathe, let alone mount any kind of real offense.
But here's what made this performance truly special. It wasn't just the grappling. We saw a completely different, evolved striking game that proved he is so much more than the one-dimensional fighter a lot of people thought he was.
And to really get how big of a leap this was, you have to look at the difference between what people thought his striking was before this fight and the reality of what he delivered inside that octagon. So coming into this fight, a lot of critics, as MMA News pointed out, kind of saw his striking as slow and stiff. The general idea was that his stand-up was just a tool, a way to get the fight to the ground where he could really go to work. But what we actually saw? Oh, it was a whole different ballgame. He was so methodical, mixing in these sharp jabs with punishing calf kicks that were clearly hurting his opponent. But here's the genius part. The kicks weren't just for damage. They were setting up the takedowns. He'd compromise JDM's leg, force a reaction, and then bam, he'd shoot for the takedown. This was smart, integrated fighting, and all of this just feeds into the bigger picture, a calm, methodical, and perfectly executed game plan from start to finish.
His game plan, which outlets like Fight.tv laid out, was crystal clear. Use relentless wrestling and top control to completely shut down his opponent's best weapon. He never, not for a second, let Della Maddalena find his range or get into any kind of rhythm.
And the execution? It was just flawless. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't taking dumb risks. Analysts everywhere were pointing out how incredibly calm and methodical he was. Even in the last round, he wasn't desperately hunting for a submission. He was just maintaining that dominant control.
That methodical pace also answered a huge question people had before the fight: his stamina. And this is where you see a real split between what the fans were right about and what the experts actually saw.
So if you were on fan forums, you saw a lot of chatter about whether the extra muscle he put on to move up in weight would kill his gas tank. But the reality? CBS Sports put it perfectly. He never looked tired, not even after 5 hard, grueling rounds.
So, after a performance like that, what does it all mean for his legacy? Let's zoom out and take a look at the records, the praise, and yeah, some of the critiques too.
When we talk about his legacy, it really comes down to 2 numbers. The first one, 2. He is now a 2-division champion. That puts him in some seriously elite company. And the second number, 16. As in 16 consecutive wins, tying one of the most sacred records in the sport. You put those 2 things together and it just fundamentally changes the whole conversation around this guy. So I think the big takeaway here is that the perception of him has totally changed. This dominant performance showed everyone that he has evolved. He's not just the grappler anymore. He's a complete mixed martial artist.
But to get the whole picture, we have to be honest and say that not everyone was singing his praises without any reservations. There were still some questions and critiques floating around.
On the one hand, you've got all this incredible praise, people calling it a masterclass, calling him a complete fighter. But on the other hand, you had critics like Chael Sonnen asking a pretty fair question. Did his opponent just have an off night? Della Maddalena's striking output was way lower than usual, and it made some people wonder if Makhachev was ever truly tested.
And that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? He's tied a historic record, he's got 2 belts on his shoulders, so has Islam Makhachev finally done enough to silence all the doubters and cement his place as an all-time great? Or did this victory just open up a whole new can